Leaders with Vision, the Perspective Series. I am delighted to see you all here on our kickoff Leaders with Vision luncheon. I hope you will make this a regular every month. And I will remind you that if you join, Leaders with Vision, the dues are $60, but we will discount a 20% discount on your luncheon tickets, so that at the end of the period, this year there'll only be 8. Your cost of belonging will only cost you $20 a year. And we will have some very exciting topics. For example, this month, of course, we're covering the Louisiana tax reform. Next month will be education. I'll have something more for you at the end of this period, so don't leave before you get the good news. We have some of the lineup. I'm waiting for some of the other presenters to call in and tell me that they've accepted. And if they don't, I'll tell you who's been invited. But anyhow, then in April, we'll be looking at health care from all perspectives. And in May, now this changes if the legislature does something really crazy and hot and we need to get to. But in May, we are looking at doing the emergency preparedness, since that's right before the start of the hurricane season. So that's the initial 4 months. And of course in June, we will also be hosting the reality check, since our comrades over at the League of Women Voters can no longer do anything on the state level. And of course, reality check with the Louisiana review of legislative action falls under that heading. We will be handling that, since they can't do it, and we believe these are vital services to the public. What the format is, if this is your first time, I'm going to be introducing our speakers one by one, and telling you where they're from. They are going to be representing their perspective from their organization. Then at the bottom of the hour, we will switch and take questions from the audience. John, you're going to have the microphone. If you will raise your hand and stand, John will bring the microphone to you and ask your question. Be very clear. And we want to thank the press for being here. We're very excited about our new venture, and we hope you are excited enough to join us. Now, start with, from representing the administration's point of view and the Louisiana Department of Revenue, Assistant Secretary Jason DeQueer. Please welcome Jason.
You know, when we look at tax reform, Louisiana has one of the lowest tax burdens in the country. It's the 4th lowest. However, our tax structure is one of the most complicated in the country. It's 32nd. And you ask why? Why do we have such a complicated tax structure, and what's the need for doing this? If you look at Title 47, you can see how thick it is, which are tax laws. And if you look at our tax exemption budget book with 468 exemptions in it, you've got to navigate those 2 big books in order to get to a low tax burden. Why is this important? Well, because the complexity of our structure prevents us from attracting individuals, small businesses, entrepreneurs, and corporations to our state. When they look at the low burden, they also realize they've got to navigate through 4 or 5 rates on the corporate income tax side, 3 rates on the personal income tax side, myriad by hundreds of exemptions. And so what's happening is our individuals, our small businesses, our corporations are spending more time navigating through our complex tax laws, the 468 exemptions, and whether or not they're applicable to them, than spending time growing their businesses, spending time with their families, and spending time trying to encourage development with their respective business. So we need to start over. We need to build a more simple structure. If you look at some of our neighbors in the region, Florida, Texas, their structure ranks them in the top 10. Our structure is 32nd. Their tax burden is also low like ours, but their structure is one that mimics more of their tax burden. I'm from Baton Rouge. I'm from Louisiana. I've traveled across the country for schooling and other ventures, but as I've come back, I realize that I've lost friends, I've lost individuals. I've been a part of representing small businesses that have moved to Texas, that have moved to Florida, because when they look at starting a business, they look at the complexity. One of the factors they look at is the complexity of the tax structure. And so by changing the tax structure, we feel that we can now begin to be a competitor, not just regionally, but nationally. In fact, with our proposed plan, our tax structure looks like we would move from our 32nd ranking to that in the top 4. That would only put us behind South Carolina, Wyoming, and Alaska. Not only would we be competitive regionally, but we would be competitive nationally. So our plan is going to be to eliminate the personal income tax, eliminate corporate income taxes, and expand the base in the sales tax arena to that of more services. Many of you know this. We have more of a service-based economy. The taxation on tangible personal property and goods is becoming less of the base, and services is more the economy we live in, and we feel that we need to build a structure now that reflects the economy that we live in. Also, by doing this, we know that there are some things that are important to retain, particularly for individuals in the lower income ranges. We're going to continue to protect and exempt food for home consumption, prescription drugs, and residential utilities. And by continuing to exempt those items, we will be building obviously more progressive elements to our sales tax structure. Furthermore, the studies will show that the state's sales tax revenue has been the most stable source of revenue for our state. This will lead to better predictability, better budgeting, better forecasting purposes for the decisions that we need to make at the state level. The income taxes have been a much more volatile base. So this plan obviously is to resolve a lot of the complexity and simplicity, put some simplicity into our structure, and we feel that it will continue to help grow and foster more jobs, a better economy, to not just make Louisiana competitive regionally, but to make Louisiana competitive nationally and globally. Thank you.
Speaker is Jim Richardson, the LSU economist, and he's going to give us a broad-based view of the development of the Louisiana tax reform. Jim?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Gene. And let me say, as an economist, we have a certain definition of tax reform. And typically when we say tax reform, we mean broad base, low rate, simple and fair as possible, competitive, and then providing the money the state says it needs for those services we want to pay for. Now, and I believe when Governor General came out with his first discussion of tax reform, he kind of defined it in those terms. Low rates, broad base, simple and fair. But then we came out with a particular proposal that Jason just talked about. I said, is this tax reform or tax deform? Because look at the differences we have here. No income tax. Everybody can say that sounds great. No income tax, but we still want some services. And the governor said very clearly, this is revenue neutral. We're going to make up the difference someplace else. So some other rate goes up, and that's the sales tax rate goes up. So you have a higher rate, which is contrary to what you typically think about tax reform, and you have one rate is zero. And we have to go back and say, okay, what do we really want to accomplish? We say, okay, the income tax. If you look at our income tax right now, compared to other states, again, take away Texas and Florida that are exceptions, we have a very comparable, very competitive, and very workable income tax. It's simple to do. It's not the element of the complications in our tax system at all. So that's not an issue. Now, on the sales tax, there's no doubt the sales tax base is dated. It's commodity driven, whereas the economy is now service driven. expanding the sales tax base is a good idea. You can also expand the sales tax base and lower the rate in that sense and maintain revenue neutrality. The other element is look at the revenues about the stability. The major instabilities, the inability to forecast, comes from primarily corporate income tax, which has incredible gyrations and ups and downs in our mineral revenues. So that's where the real focus needs to be. How do we get some type of revenue forecasting connected to those elements? But if you go back and say, okay, if we do what the governor's saying, what are the issues, what are the implications? Well, one, you certainly have a very major shift in the distribution of who pays for state services. Now, the administration has been very upfront, saying we are going to make sure we don't put an undue burden on the lower income people. That's going to be one more element of complication to the system, though, that they have to somehow handle that. And then, but still, if on the income tax, you eliminate the income tax, each of us in this room can say to ourselves, I know exactly how much I'm going to save from that provision. But how much will we pay from all the other new taxes? We're not so sure. Be hard to work out. But somebody is going to pay that. And the question is where and whom? Well, if you look at all the services that they're suggesting, certainly a lot of those will be business-oriented taxes, probably, which will leak down to the system someplace. So once you start changing the tax system tremendously, there are a lot of repercussions. And then the other repercussion on the forecasting is what happens as we make the transition. How do we forecast all these things? How do we know for sure how much money we'll get from this new tax base? Well, it will be trial and error. They have great people helping them. They'll do their very best. The numbers will be as honest can be. But the odds are they'll be wrong. And then we have to kind of work our way through that system again. We'll ask questions after that, okay? Thank you very much. Otherwise, I'll...
Next presenter will be Jan Moeller from the Louisiana Budget Project, who has a different take, a different perspective.
Well, thank you, Gene, for inviting us to make a few brief remarks. And a lot of what I was going to say has already been covered. But I want to say a couple of things. First of all, we agree with the governor that the tax system is complex, that there are too many exemptions and loopholes, and that it's been time to take a look at these for several years. But I also, we agree with Jim that when you move to a system of higher sales taxes and eliminating income taxes, you're going to shift the tax burden from the highest earners to low and moderate income families. And I know the administration is working on ways to mitigate this, but if you're going to do this in a revenue neutral fashion, it's frankly almost impossible to get it done. But our main point, and if I want to make one main point, is we're going to undertake this incredibly complex task of looking at our overall tax structure. This should not be done without looking at the context of where we stand on the budget. And as anybody who's been around here the last few years, our budget has been in dire straits. We've had 5 straight years of deep cuts, 5 straight years of shortfalls. If you go back, even look at over the past decade, the state general fund on an inflation-adjusted basis is down over 6%, but the money we lose to tax exemptions is up by 167% over that same time period. We've had higher education in this state state support for higher education cut by more than $625 million. Per pupil spending in public school is down by more than $500 when you count the inflation factor that hasn't been funded for 4 straight years. And Louisiana's budget problems are continuing at a time when other states are digging out from this great recession we've been through. 2 years ago, in 2010-11, you had 42 states had budget shortfalls. Last year it was down to 31. Last year we were one of only 10 states that had mid-year budget shortfalls. Ours was the biggest state budget shortfall in the country when you compare it to the overall state budget. And of course, this year we had another mid-year shortfall, and we've really started to cut the budget to the bone. We're closing beds for battered women's shelters. We're closing the Nurse Family Partnership, which is one of the most effective anti-poverty programs we have. We're shutting down healthcare for mental health care for at-risk kids. So we're no longer cutting fat in state government. We're cutting down to the bone. And when I asked our partners in Washington, well, how many other states had mid-year shortfalls this year, they said, we stopped keeping track of that because everybody else is kind of digging out. So I don't think you can have this, or you should have this conversation and say that it's going to be revenue neutral. If you're going to look at these tax exemptions, if you're going to look at which exemptions are not doing their job, then it should be with an eye towards raising revenue and reinvesting some of the money we've lost in higher education. We heard Dr. Jenkins at LSU come out this week and say our flagship institution is in danger of falling into the second tier. That shouldn't happen in 2013, but we've been cutting the budget so much. There are a lot of other problems that we suspect with what the governor's proposing. Again, we're worried about the regressivity. We also worry that if you take away a key the income tax, you're going to be putting a lot of eggs in the sales tax basket. I mean, none of us would take our retirement nest egg and put 60% of it on IBM. And we're essentially saying we're going to put a whole lot of our revenue base into one tax source. We're also worried about the impact this would have on seniors and people on fixed incomes. We have an earned income tax credit in this state that gives a rebate to low-income workers, and that could be expanded. But people on Social Security, state retirees, they don't pay state income tax right now, but they would be paying more for goods and services under this plan, and we are very worried about how they will be protected. But having said that, we are very glad and very encouraged that there is finally a serious look being taken at all of these tax exemptions and what they've done to our tax code. We just wish they weren't trading that for elimination of the income tax.
Now, nothing gets on the floor of the House when it comes to raising taxes or changing taxes until they go through the Ways and Means Committee. So would you please welcome the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, Joe Robideau.
Thank you, Gene. Thank you all for having us here to speak. Gene did point out that on the cover of this book it says compact edition. So it's actually bigger than what this reflects. I'm thrilled that we're engaging in the debate of whether or not we should get rid of corporate income taxes and personal income taxes. I think it is a feather in the cap of any state when they're trying to attract businesses to be able to say we have no taxes with regard to the income tax. There's a very short list of states that are able to say that, and I think if you look at employment numbers, you'll see that nationally those states with no income taxes have grown significantly more in employment than the rest of us. To acknowledge what was said by Jan and Mr. Richardson, it is true. Sales tax in and of itself is more regressive than it is than an income tax is, but you can rest assured that in the legislature, the practical truth that exists is if there's a larger burden on the poor or the working poor in the bill, it is not going to pass. I mean, it's dead on arrival. And so there's a lot of effort being made as we're trying to figure out a draft of how this may work to make sure that, in fact, the poor and the working poor are better off under the plan, the proposed plan, than under the current plan. How we get to there is what's being discussed now, and hopefully sometime in the next few weeks we'll be able to reveal some of the ideas that are out there that will exist in a draft form. Even then there'll be debate once the draft is out there to say, well, hey, what about a tweak here or a tweak there? Could we make it better by making these changes? And I fully expect that to happen throughout the entire process. But at the end of the day, if a member of our constituency is paying X number of dollars and under the proposed plan is going to be paying some amount less, then the debate changes to, okay, well, wait, do we want to redistribute the wealth differently than that? Personally, someone has to pay for those victories. And I agree when we talk about revenue neutrality, it's impossible to say every person, every business, every industry is going to be in the exact same position after than they were before. I can say with a significant amount of confidence that every individual is probably going to be better off. Now, who pays for that? Well, as we've floated some ideas out there, smokers may pay for that. Some of the industries that aren't too happy with the proposal right now, oil and gas, they may be paying for some of that. So there's folks out there that aren't going to be winners as the individuals are. How it ends up and who ends up being the ones that kind of cover the cost, you know, when we expand the base and we identify those services that we're going to expand the sales tax base to, who utilizes those services? Are they luxury type items? Is that who utilizes them? Well, then that's part of who's paying for the change also. But I feel confident in the process. The legislative process, as ugly as it is at times, and John Bell can attest to that. At the end of the day, most often it works the way it's supposed to work. And there'll be a lot of debate on this issue, obviously. There's still a lot of work to do over the course of the next few weeks to try to get something in a draft form so we can start debating specifics rather than generalities. But I'm confident at the end of the day that Louisiana is going to have a good shot at repealing its income tax structure. My hope is that we do, and my hope is that we do it in a way that affects people in the most positive way as it relates to the citizens of the state. Thank you.
Now we have delivered the administration's package to the House Ways and Means Committee, and let's say that it gets out to the floor. Now, from the other side of the aisle, we have John Bell Edwards, who will be talking about what it's going to take to get it out of the House. John Bell.
Thank you, Gene. And my question is whether the $60 dues are calculated before or after we put a sales tax on them. I appreciate the invitation to be here today. It might not surprise you to know that I have an opinion about this, a view that's contrary to that of Joel Robideau. And he is my friend. Everybody at the table is my friend, and we always feel like we're obligated to say that, but it is true. However, I view this as a tax increase on most individuals. That will be the ultimate impact of this. You've already been told by Jason, we already have one of the lowest tax burdens in the nation when it comes to state and local taxes. And it's lower than Texas, Arkansas, Mississippi, and Florida. I should think we could market ourselves with that. We've been told by this administration that we're bringing in business every day. But we were told that we need to do this so that we can begin to compete. I guess I can't follow that. And to undertake a restructuring of this magnitude that is supposed to be revenue neutral All we're doing is reallocating an existing tax burden and creating new winners and new losers. Let me tell you who the new winners are going to be. The new winners are going to be those individuals who are making a lot of money. Let's say that your salary is $250,000 a year. You're going to get a tax cut of $12,500. For this to be revenue neutral for that individual, his consumer spending on taxable items has to increase by $180,000 for that year. That's not going to happen. If you got an individual making $320,000, he or she is going to get a $16,700 tax cut. And in order for this to be revenue neutral for that individual, consumer spending on taxable items is going to have to go up by $240,000. That's not going to happen. So if the overall package is revenue neutral, who's going to pay it? It's going to be people at the other end of the spectrum. And we're never going to find a way to accommodate them, because every time you give an accommodation to try to keep it from hitting them that hard, you're increasing the overall price of your package. The sales tax has to go up that much further. So this is not what we should be about. Now, who else are losers? State retirees, retired teachers, retired parish and municipal workers. Their pensions aren't taxed as income. There's no swap for them. This is just a flat up, straight out tax increase. That's another set of losers. Maybe it doesn't bother some. That would bother me if we did that to people who would put a career of public service in with that expectation. Now, understand that this tax increase on sales tax is not going to be a 2% increase when it comes to services. They aren't taxed at all right now. This is going to be a 12% increase on the tax of services. And so keep that in mind. And if you want to know what types of services we're talking about, go to the website of the Texas Comptroller and look at the services that they're taxing over there, because that's what we've been told Louisiana will model after. Now, our retailers are already at a competitive disadvantage, both to out of state, because we already have a high sales tax, but especially with respect to the internet and catalog sales, this will only make that worse. And to even think about doing this before Congress has enacted a legislation to allow states to collect that internet sales tax is completely irresponsible. Now, other people don't like it. Car dealers, agricultural interests, they may get some accommodations, but if they do, remember, the overall increase has to be higher to make up for that if this is going to be revenue neutral. Local government, they're not going to be able to renew sales taxes at the local government level when we have the highest sales tax in the nation, and we will if we do this. So inevitably what's going to happen is, over time, we are going to start putting the local tax burden on people through the property tax. Because there's a homestead exemption there, and you can still get some people to vote for that. Well, who does that transfer the burden to? That transfers it to business, because business properties are not subject to the homestead exemption. So this is a real problem. If we vote for it, we wouldn't know what increase we're voting for, because there's an automatic adjustment after year one. An unelected body takes a vote, the Revenue Estimating Committee takes a vote. There will be an automatic adjustment to make it revenue neutral. So you can't know what this increase would be. It's not worthy of the people of Louisiana, and I'm certainly against it, and I've got 1 second left. Thank y'all.
I'm honest. All right, we've heard from our presenters. And now let's hear from you. Do you have questions? See.
Yeah, Jason, you talked about 468 tax deductions or people who lost revenue. How much is that in dollars?
No, you have to come up here.
Oh, okay. For the tax exemption.
Excuse me. So if you look at the overall value of the tax exemptions that the state has in terms of the 468, you're looking at about $7 billion.
So if there's $7 million in tax exemptions and the proposal to do away with corporate and state income taxes around $3 billion, you would only have to get rid of half the tax exemptions for it to be revenue neutral. Why are we talking about increasing sales tax?
Yeah. So good question. Some of the exemptions that are the most high dollar exemptions are those constitutional exemptions that we want to retain for food for home consumption, prescription drugs, residential utilities. You also have other exemptions in there that are actually federal exemptions that we're prohibited from touching. So there are a set of exemptions, even though they're calculated in the tax exemption budget book, that are off the table. Also wanted to just take a point to address Jim Richardson earlier when he was talking about the numbers will be wrong on the forecasting. Well, Jim sits on the Revenue Forecasting Committee, and his numbers are already wrong most of the time. And so, you know, that's why we're adjusting and making changes to the budget, because when he predicts revenue, he mentioned the volatility of the income taxes is what causes us to miss the mark. And he said that state sales tax or sales tax is a more stable base. So we feel this will enable Dr. Richardson and other folks who sit on the Revenue Estimating Commission to have a better shot at getting and projecting more accurate revenue. With respect to Jan Moeller, he knows that we have sat down and worked with him on an earned income tax credit. He's worked with us. Now, I understand he has a debate about raising revenue versus revenue neutrality. We believe that growing the economy is better by keeping a revenue neutral model rather than raising taxes on people. But in terms of the lower income, we're looking at not only exempting food for home consumption at the state level, but potentially exempting food for home consumption at the local level. And now when folks walk into the grocery store, potentially all of their food for home consumption would be exempt. And in terms of Representative Edwards' comments about, well, now we're only starting to look at being attractive or bringing businesses in, let me just clarify. Louisiana has done a good job of bringing businesses into the state. However, what I'm talking about in terms of competition, the Tax Foundation ranks our state as one of the worst, the most complicated tax structures out there. And if we enact this change to our tax structure, we now have a national ranking not of 32, but that of 4, which would make us competitive in terms of our ability to attract businesses and give Louisiana a much harder look when they want to invest their capital here in our state. Thank you.
Yes. As a teacher that's retired, is it not true that this tax will affect me, because I'll be paying actually more, because I'll be paying an increase in sales tax, number one. Number two, legislation has blocked me from being a consultant or a substitute after retirement, so I don't have an extra source of income. I can't just go off like corporate lawyers and go to another company and do a consultation, you know. So I see, and maybe you can give me your perspective, how this would help me, because as I see it, it is not going to help me. And I have no alternative to make an extra income because of legislation prior.
Paraphrasing, what are your alternatives?
Right.
Okay. Jason? Or Joel?
John Bill, you want to do that?
I've already told him he's right, so.
I would say that your interpretation of the bill that doesn't exist is correct, but please know, you and all the retirees, that we are working toward a solution so that the retirees are not punished. I mean, just to make sure that everybody understands, no state worker that's retired pays any state income tax and hasn't paid state income taxes. And so that's a benefit that they've been handed out to them. And so if there's an increase in sales tax, then obviously they don't get any benefit from the repeal of the income tax. They would actually be paying more sales tax now. But there is a fix. We're working on a few different options, and it's going to be incorporated into the bill. Because again, the practical truth is, it's not going to pass if every retiree in the state of Louisiana is opposed to the bill, and that's just the way it works in the legislature. So there's going to be a fix for the retirees, and then I forgot what your second question was, except that it was a good question. Oh, yeah, and you can't go back to work in state government. You can certainly go back to work in the private sector. I mean, there's nothing to prevent any retirees from going to work. You may not, be able to go teach again, and then that's not exactly true. There's a waiting period, and there's 25%, you can make up to 25%, so you can go back to work. It was a system that was being abused at a certain level, but that's a debate for another day, and really doesn't have to do with the tax package, which is why the legislature passed something to try to curtail some of the activities that were going on with the retire, rehire provision that existed prior.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. You've got it right. And if we come up with a way to accommodate you in this bill, then what we've been told is going to be a 1.78 cent increase in the sales tax. The existing sales tax is going to have to go up. When we make an accommodation for the people at the lower end of the economic spectrum, that is going to have to go up. When we make an accommodation for the car dealers, because they're going to be worried about losing that exemption that they have, where you only pay the sales tax on the difference between your trade-in and your new car, or they're going to be worried about what the additional sales tax is going to do to you, then the overall price of this package is going to go up. It's figured at 1.78 cents without those things in it. So we don't know. Every time we do this, and every time we say we're going to make sure nobody's worse off, well, let me tell you something. The Easter Bunny's coming soon, but he's not bringing $3 billion. Somebody's going to have to pay it. And it's going to be people like you, I promise you. That's the way it's going to work. And those people at the top end of the spectrum, I gave you two numbers a while ago. What I didn't tell you is those salaries are made by Tim Barfield and Stephen Morey, the two architects of the plan. Now, they're good people, they're intelligent people, but they're going to reap a huge benefit. You, my friend, are going to pay a huge price. That's the way this is going to work. And by the way, the statement was made a while ago, if we don't do this, we can't participate in the federal legislation about internet sales tax. I know he didn't mean to say if we don't repeal the income tax, we can't participate. And we don't have to extend the sales tax to services to participate. We just have to have the same base at the state and local level. And you can do that with only an adjustment by preventing the locals from taxing pharmaceuticals, groceries, and residential utilities. And there would be other ways to make up for that. But we don't have to do this whole package to take advantage of it. And I will tell you, it is irresponsible to go forward because his words were, if Congress passes this. Has anybody paid attention to how dysfunctional Congress is? They have agreed on this for many, many years and hadn't passed it yet. So you're right, and you're right to be concerned.
Let me quickly touch on those three items. As Chairman Robideau mentioned, we are looking at and studying the impact for retirees and the increased burden. He's absolutely right on that. The fallacy in Representative Edwards' argument is that he's saying the only way to accomplish this is to increase the sales tax rate. That's erroneous. The reason is I've just talked about expanding the sales tax base to services. The more items you bring into the base, the more revenue the state can collect, and you don't have to raise the rate. In addition, we've also made very publicly that we're looking at severance tax exemptions. Those are exemptions, if you eliminate many of them, generate revenue. We've also talked about the increase on cigarettes and excise and other tobacco products. Those are all ways that you can generate revenue without increasing the sales tax rate. So that is not the only way to raise revenue or to generate revenue. The other issue in terms of the online sales tax collection, this structure, the sales tax structure that we have today in terms of the collection of sales tax will not allow us to compete or to collect sales tax revenue from online retailers if we have the same system today. And so that has to be passed. Now, again, the fallacy was that we're relying on this revenue to get to revenue neutrality. That is inaccurate. Our numbers are not such that we need the sales tax revenue from online sales to get to revenue neutrality. What this will do is we need to be in play to protect our local retailers, to be able to protect our businesses, and that we're not one of 4 states in the country that is unable to collect this revenue from remote sellers who come into Louisiana and compete by not having the proper structure. And so that's something that we need to be proactive, not reactive. We need to be proactive in making sure that we have this structure so that if it does pass, we're in play. Thank you.
I have a question that why we're only talking about sales taxes, because the one area that Louisiana is rich is in our natural resources. And for over 30 years, leaders on both sides of the aisle have proposed processing taxes on oil and gas that would be able to eliminate income and sales taxes. And so we've got a pipeline infrastructure that can't simply be uprooted and moved to other states. Why are we not looking at these other alternatives that don't have the same kind of unnecessary burden on the low and middle class? I guess that's directed to Jason and anybody else who wants to comment.
Well, why don't we get the, why don't we have both legislators and representing the administration? You start, Jason. And then we have the Republican and Democratic response to it. How's that?
Well, I can tell you that the entrees of options that we've looked at are far. I mean, we haven't just looked at the sales tax base. Again, you know, there are other ways that you can increase revenue to the state without just increasing the sales tax rate, and I've gone over those. The latter part of your statement, I think is incorrect in terms of that this is only going to burden the middle and lower income. As I've mentioned earlier, we're looking at the earned income tax credit and a solution. I've worked with Jan. Jan is looking at ranges. I'm looking at ranges so that taxpayers are not in any worse situation. Also, if we get to this uniform base that I'm hearing, maybe Representative Edwards is going to be endorsing the second part of our package, so he likes the uniform base. That means local governments would be exempting the food for home consumption. And again, that's building in a much more progressive element to the sales tax base, because right now, when you walk into the grocery store, you're paying the local portion of the sales tax on those items. And if you can begin to exempt that, then not only by retaining some of these earned income tax credit and other programs, you're further reducing the sales tax burden for middle and low income.
Well, maybe I could ask the question a different way. If you've been looking at all the different alternatives, why was a processing tax eliminated from consideration?
Yeah. And again, you know, of the alternatives that we're looking at, I can tell you currently a processing tax is not in the plan.
No comment on why?
Joel?
Back when Governor Treen introduced it, there were interstate commerce laws that prohibited it, but there have since been cases in the Supreme Court that have now made it legal to do so. And there are, you know, like I said, leaders on both sides of the aisle for 30 years who have said that this would be a great thing for such an impoverished state.
Yeah, I would say that, you know, it's going to be the governor's package and the governor's bill, and you got to start somewhere. There's going to be, I don't know how many amendments that are going to be offered. I would certainly expect to see an amendment offered to say, hey, how about we throw this revenue in there, and with that, what effect will it have on the sales tax, and maybe we even lower the sales tax, and that'll be debated. The folks that feel like oil and gas employs a large number of our constituents, and they don't want to hurt the oil and gas industry, are going to vote one way, and those that feel like that's a good idea are going to vote the other way, and the amendment's either going to get on or get off. But at the draft stage, we've got to come out with a package. They're going to present it to us, and then we're going to go from there, and then the debate begins on how do we want to tweak it.
Your question is a good one, and I didn't obviously come up with a plan, so I can't tell you why what's in it's in it and why what's not is not. But I will tell you, it does. The plan as it exists today does envision a repeal of the exemption from severance taxes, and that has the oil and gas industry screaming in and of itself, and especially the gas portion of that, because natural gas prices are so much lower now than they were just a couple of years ago. So that's certainly a big part of it. Now, Jason mentioned something a while ago about putting some progressive element in what is a regressive structure, and that is the sales tax. You do not make a sales tax progressive when you say lower income people are not going to have to pay that sales tax on groceries or on residential utilities or on pharmaceuticals. Because for that poor widow woman that I represent in Greensburg who goes to the store to buy her food, she's not going to pay that sales tax. And when she pays that utility bill to heat that trailer, she's not going to pay a sales tax. And when she goes to the drugstore, she's not going to pay a sales tax. But it is also true that the individual who owns a 12,000 square foot home in a gated subdivision is not paying a sales tax on that utility bill. And when they go to Whole Foods to buy their Kobe beef imported from Japan, they're not paying a sales tax on that either. And they don't pay a sales tax on their pharmaceuticals. So that is a neutral factor. It doesn't make it progressive. And I happen to like that policy, but we're not doing a special favor for the poor when we do that. And we shouldn't misrepresent it, because you cannot make a sales tax progressive.
Will issues like the single point collection for sales taxes be introduced as separate pieces of legislation, or will it be bundled into an all or nothing bill?
In terms of the actual legislation, we're looking at two parts. The first part will be the revenue swap situation, is what people are terming it, the elimination of the income tax, expansion of the sales tax base. And then there would be a second part that would handle more of the administrative issues with sales tax and or just tax collection and simplifying it. So it would be two different parts.
Different bills?
Two different bills, yes.
My question's pretty simple, just on services. We'll be, assume this passes, we'll be paying sales tax on services, and that would include all services like services of a doctor, any kind of medical services. The insurance companies would have to pay the sales tax on
take this one for you.
On what the doctor charges for his services, or any healthcare practitioner.
Well, I don't know what's in the plan. I was just reminded of that. But obviously, Mr. DeQueer doesn't either. Because every time I ask a question, well, you just go look to Texas for your model. If you go to Texas, you can pull up the services that are taxed over there. We've been told that's where to look to see what we would do here in Louisiana, and those services would not be taxed. And that's probably for policy reasons and political reasons. There are lots of lawyers in the legislature. I'm one. So putting the sales tax on legal services would probably not be received well. You have everybody requires medical services, and they're expensive, and so putting the sales tax on that would also be very problematic. And I think there are enough accountants in the legislature that we're not going to put a sales tax when somebody figures out how much income tax you owe. So those things are not in the Texas model. I would have to assume they're not going to be in the package when it comes out. But you bring up a good point, because the way they did this in Texas and elsewhere, we will just, I suspect, I haven't seen it, we're going to have a list of maybe 15 or 20 service areas that will be subject to the sales tax. It will then be up to the Department of Revenue through a rule promulgation process to decide